Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger.
The following program may contain coarse language, adult themes, and bad attempts at humor. Listener discretion is advised.
What is President Trump's goal? What is his vision? He wants to put an American flag on Mars.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Good Sunday evening. I am your host, JEFF, also known as a Cosmic Bard over on X, and this is the Lost Wanderer podcast for September 7th, 2025. Welcome aboard the ACS Serenade. Now, tonight's top story, as it usually starts, as too many, unfortunately, space stories do, not with a countdown, but with a committee room, a microphone, couple of flags and probably a nameplate, and a senator who most likely knows how to work the camera. Now, Ted Cruz doesn't invent nicknames. He sort of harvests them. He pulls the ripcord on a phrase the space crowd has used in years in private and on message boards in public. The Senate Launch System. Now, it lands with a resounding boom because it's true enough to sting. SLS, a machine of heat and thrust and math, also happens to be a machine of districts and payrolls and appropriation riders. A cathedral built not just by engineers, but by zip codes. Now that's the contradiction at the heart of American spaceflight. We wrap stainless steel in poetry, then wrap that poetry often in an omnibus. We tell school kids about Armstrong and Aldrin, then hand the procurement paper to people who've never washed the soot out of a flame trench. And still, somehow, engines light and people end up flying. It's both maddening and beautiful the way this country does the impossible things with one hand while patting itself on the back with the other. But buried under hearing room theatrics and sound bites, there's a pulse that feels a little bit like the future. NASA isn't just arguing line items, it's sketching infrastructure. We have a plan to put a fission power plant on the moon. No, not just an artist concept, not a press conference hologram, but 100 kilowatts of steady electricity etched into the regolith. Picture the lunar night, 14 Earth days of black glass and cold. Solar arrays, well, they tend to sleep in those conditions. Batteries will yawn and probably shiver a little. A habitat hums only if it has a heart. And on the moon, that heart can't skip a beat for what is essentially half a month at a time. So you have to start thinking like settlers, not visitors. You talk about shielding and heat exchangers, radiators unfurling like silver ferns. You run numbers on water extraction, on oxygen crackling free from rock, on drills that eat dust and spit out the chemical beginnings of civilization. 100 kilowatts is not a city, but it is a village. It is lights that will stay on. It is air that will keep moving. And it is a promise that when the sun dips behind the horizon, your world will not. Now, yes, we get lost sometimes because most of us are men in the age of 13, arguing whose rocket is taller, maybe whose pad is a little bit saltier, whose integration flow is least cursed. But we forget perhaps the real race, the one adults allegedly run. That is a race to stay. To plant something that outlives a budget cycle in a midterm election. A nuclear plant on the moon is a sentence written in the language of permanence. It says, we intend to be here next month, and the month after that, and through the long night when the tourists go home. And if you listened closely, victory laps are not what you've heard from necessarily the front office. You've heard a voice crackle with frustration. The acting chief didn't dress it up for the press. He didn't file the edges off. He said bluntly that he's sick of the storyline where America gets beat back to the moon. Not a policy paper, a raw emotion. The kind that leaks through when your inbox is full of hot takes and your engineers are doing math at midnight and the headlines refuse to match the work you know is actually occurring. That moment actually matters because space isn't just hardware and delta V and guidance loops. It's uncomfortable truth. It's about prestige. It's the theater of who leads and who follows. Now, of course, we'll pretend we're all above that, but we aren't. Ask any pilot who's ever taxied past a rival squadron on a tarmac. Ask any kid who ever glued together a model Saturn V and imagined the world watching. There is pride at stake here, and pride isn't some ornamental thing tacked onto the nose cone. It's more the fuel that keeps a program from slipping quietly into just good enough. So hold those three images in your head at once. A senator smirking as he says the quiet part out loud about a rocket built by committee. A blueprint for a lunar reactor, the kind of unsexy essential gear that turns exploration into residency. And the leader who, for a moment, drops the varnish and lets the country hear the edge in his voice. That's actually America's space story this week. Not one thing, but a tangle. Politics that slow, engineering that accelerates, and pride that refuses to let the narrative calcify into second place. We are, as it always seems, a paradox. We invent the wheel and then debate the road. We fund the orchestra and then argue over the chairs. Somehow, in that mess, the music still gets played. Now, if you're thinking, why now? Why that tone? Why the sudden display of urgency? Well, you already know the answer, even if we won't say it in this lead story. Because the world is watching the scoreboard again, just like they all do on Sunday, like the day it is today, opening season of NFL. They are watching scoreboard, sees who's winning, who's leading, and if their guys are scoring points for their team or not, hoping the other team doesn't. And as we watch, we see others practice their choreograph. Because the myth that we can coast on history meets the math of orbital mechanics, and it loses every time. Here's the truth we can say without a committee vote. We go. We go because it's ugly and complicated and worth it. We go because a village on the moon without a humming core and warm air at midnight is the kind of sentence that this country still knows how to write. We go because it bothers us deeply that anyone would think otherwise. So take a breath with me. Hear the rattle of the hearing room fade. Hear the soft electric thrum of a reactor that does not sleep. Hear under both the human voice that refuses to tuck its pride away. And that is the beat we're going to try to ride tonight a little bit. The beat that carries us from politics to power, from paperwork to permanence, although there will be some politics. We just can't get around that. And now, with the stage set and the pulse steady, let's turn the cameras fully and without apology, let's face it, to the rogues gallery that you kind of all come here anyway and really, really enjoy. Because if our leaders are bristling, it's not in a vacuum. Now, every space agency likes to publish beautiful, wonderful roadmaps. Most are optimistic, some are highly delusional, and a few are written less for engineers and more for propaganda offices. Take, for instance, China's new polished plan to land taconauts on the moon by 2030. And, well, it checks all three boxes at once. And thank you, Ordy, for pointing that out. It normally works, so I had to investigate that after the show. Sorry that you didn't hear the amazing, beautiful, wonderful Assholes in Space theme song. But those watching got to see the graphics, so I'll take 50%. Now, with China on paper, it looks impressive. A two-stage Long March 10 rocket, tested piece by piece, feeding into an architecture that mirrors Apollo in broad strokes. 2 launches per crewed mission, one for the lander and one for the crew, docking in lunar orbit, boots in regolith before the decade is even out. Now, it's not science fiction. Chang'e's landers and rovers have already hit their marks. China has quietly racked up a string of lunar wins while the world was distracted by Falcon boosters doing flip landings on drone ships. And those that saw the graphic have noticed the cow fatality number has not increased for some time, if that tells you the progress China is making. Oh, and yet, behind the glossy diagrams, the 2030 target feels less like a clock ticking toward triumph than a megaphone blasting for domestic ears. Because the reality is this: lunar programs are hard, expensive, brutal. They chew through budgets and reputations alike. The United States has been trying to restart its lunar cadence for 20 years, and it still hasn't put a crew on the pad. So when China circles a date on the calendar, the question isn't can they do it, it's will they still want to? Will the Communist Party keep cutting checks after another economic hiccup or maybe another launch delay or 20 more cows disappear somehow off the farmland or the first time a lunar module explodes on ascent? And here's the part where the asshole factor comes in. Instead of presenting this goal humbly as the next step in human exploration, China is absolutely framing it as a race against us, a chest thumping contest, a way to embarrass America. Their state media leans hard on the comparison, selling the moon not as a destination for all humanity, but as a trophy to wave in Washington's face. That's what makes it less inspiring and more, irritating. Now, not the engineers. Don't get me wrong. They're very talented. They're astronauts. They're flying Chinese-made stuff. They're brave. I will not ever suggest they are not. But the politicians who see every crater as a stage, more for scientific gain, is just pure theater, in my opinion. And there's also, the inconvenient fact that space has a very long memory. China may crow about 2030 landing, but ask Russia what happens when your reach exceeds your budget. Ask NASA how a single Challenger or Columbia can reset decades of momentum overnight. Ambition is easy, but staying the power to do it, that's hard. Still, we have to take them seriously because even if the 2030 date slips, they do have a clear intent. China wants the moon, not just for rocks or science, but for influence, prestige, and perhaps even more importantly, leverage. They want to plant a flag and beam it home as proof that their system, top down, centralized, authoritarian, can outpace the messy democracies. And if history teaches us anything, it's that symbols can be just as dangerous as rockets. So yes, we do treat this story with respect because even assholes can sometimes pull out the victory. And if they do, it won't just bruise American pride, it will reshape the narrative of who leads in space. Which is exactly why NASA's acting chief sounded rattled and as pissed as he did. And it's honestly why we keep this segment right here where it belongs with another Asshole in Space segment. For if you want to understand how China does their theater, look no further than the parade grounds. Nothing says we're a superpower like wheeling your toys down a boulevard lined with cameras. All of us do it. Last week, Beijing rolled out an arsenal of hypersonic missiles, drones, and ICBMs, dressed up as if the moon were just another military district waiting to be conquered. On the surface, it looked impressive. Hypersonics are the holy grail of missile technology. Vehicles that can fly 5 or more times faster than sound, skip through the upper atmosphere, and outmaneuver defenses. Every major power wants them. Some probably have it, but won't tell us. The U.S. allegedly has programs in development. Russia claims to field them. Not sure I buy that one. And China loves to put them on flatbed trucks so everyone can see them. But there is a difference between a test range and a parade route. Hypersonics are notoriously difficult to guide, to cool, and to power. Some of those glittering missiles may be shells. Prototypes rolled out more for photographers than pilots. It's a pageant designed to say, look at us, we're untouchable. And in classic fashion, it's more about chest thumping than capability. So why talk about this in a space show? Well, because the line between rockets and missiles have always been thin. Von Braun's V2 became Saturn V ancestor. The same engines that lift satellites can, with a different payload, deliver warheads. And let's face it, China knows this. By parading hypersonics alongside their lunar ambitions all within the same week, they're deliberately blending this message. We didn't just reach for space. We can also threaten space and, more importantly, Earth. It's kind of the equivalent of bringing brass knuckles to a science fair. But I think perhaps the bigger problem with all of this is the theater, the theatrics of it all. It works. Neighbors in the region see the spectacle and recalibrate. U.S. defense planners scribble notes. Analysts argue over whether a weapon that can fly Mach 5 is actually controllable or just an expensive way to miss faster. Meanwhile, the image sticks, a column of sleek weapons trundling past a reviewing stand, broadcast around the world. A nation that truly believes in exploration wouldn't need to park its rockets next to its missiles. It would separate science from saber rattling. But China has this habit of blending them because prestige is the real payload. They want to be seen as the country that can do everything at once, land rovers, launch their taikonauts, and remind rivals that this dog has teeth. But technology paraded for intimidation often ends up exposed. The US military has been watching every frame of that broadcast. Engineers are probably freezing screenshots, analyzing nozzle designs, counting rivets, and probably a couple satellites trained on to see what chemicals are inside. And what Beijing sells as invincible, others quietly file under reverse engineer me. And that's a bit of irony about parading some secrets about. The more you flaunt, the less mysterious you are. So yeah, this hypersonic parade gets its mention here, not because it changes the trajectory of exploration, but because it shows us how fragile prestige can be. You can parade your way to the stars, but you can also waste a lot of fuel just trying. Now, China is taking the place of Russia that once was a glorious, if you will, allow me that little platitude toward them, spacefaring country. For once upon a time, Russia's space program was the second heartbeat of humanity's adventure off Earth. Cosmonauts rode Soyuz capsules with the same regularity Americans drove to the grocery store, it seemed. The ISS was stitched together piece by piece with Russian modules at its core. There was an era when Moscow could point at Baikonur and say, truthfully, that they carried half the burden of human spaceflight. That era is crumbling. So the latest reports out of Russia paint a picture that feels more like bankruptcy court than a mission control. The country's state-run human spaceflight company, the entity that manages Soyuz launches, cosmonaut training, and the very architecture of their crewed program, is teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Years of sanctions, brain drain, neglected infrastructure, and I'm going to give Elon credit here because with SpaceX now carrying a lot of American individuals in cargo to space, we don't need the Russian Soyuz anymore. So everything's been sort of hollowed out with what was a symbol of national pride. Yeah, Soyuz still flies. I mean, hell, for the most part, it's very reliable. But reliability without investment becomes stagnation. Their next generation capsule Oral has been promised, delayed, promised again, and delayed again. Factories that once turned out spacecraft at Cold War tempo are now just limpering along slowly, understaffed and way underfunded. But instead of admitting the decay and seeking partnerships to rebuild, Russia is just going to double down on bluster. They've been threatening to withdraw from the ISS only to backpedal when, the math doesn't work. They announce grandiose plans for their own orbital station, then quietly get it postponed until the 2030s. Every announcement sounds like bravado shouted over the sound of empty cash registers. And let's face it, the contrast is very stark. SpaceX is landing boosters like it's a frickin' boring tennis match. NASA is testing nuclear power plants for lunar nights. Hell, even India is landing rovers on the moon. Meanwhile, Russia, once you could easily consider the backbone of human spaceflight, is passing the hat, hoping someone still believes their promises. And there's tragedy in it, too. Once again, the engineers are not the villains. The Russian space workers are some of the most creative, resilient minds in the business. They kept Mir alive years longer than it had any right to be. They've patched the ISS with some special space duct tape I would love to get my hands on, and genius when things went wrong. But no amount of brilliance can paper over an empty budget. Just look at your host. Talent without funding is a stranded cosmonaut waiting for a ride that never comes. So yeah, Russia has earned its rightful spot in tonight's Assholes in Space, not because their engineers are foolish but because their leadership has turned an amazing legacy into a liability. Bankruptcy doesn't just empty bank accounts, it empties futures. And unless something dramatic changes, the nation that once raced America to the moon may not even have the rubles left to buy a ticket for the next ride. Now, for all the bluster and bankruptcy we've kind of waded through, let's remind ourselves what doing it right looks like. And for better or worse, that story keeps circling back to a beach in South Texas where a gleaming stack of stainless steel thundered off the pad on its 10th trial. Now, let's face it, Starship Flight 10 was not just another test, it was a line in the sand. The early flights, man, they gave us some fireworks. Mid-air flips, explosions, big enough to rattle windows in Mexico, spectacular failures replayed in slow motion across way too many YouTube channels. They were funny if, you weren't the one signing the checks. They were a bit more embarrassing if you were, even though they did learn things. Because the data, every belly flop, every shattered tank, was a step toward this moment. And Flight 10 worked. Booster and the ship separated cleanly. Both pieces execute maneuvers that used to exist only in computer models. The upper stage reached orbit, proving the hardware can do the job it was built for. Reentry was controlled, not catastrophic. Heat shields largely held where they were supposed to. And for the first time, it felt less like an experiment and more like an honest-to-God system. Now, this is the difference between theater and progress. While China is operating missiles, Russia is issuing, press releases. SpaceX is lighting rockets like it smokes 3 packs a day, over and over and over again. And the cadence matters more than the spectacle. Let's face it, Falcon 9 just notched its 30th flight of the year. That doesn't seem right. I think it was the single booster. I might have written that wrong. My apologies. But here's the thing. With Falcon 9 and all its records, and Starship with its Flight 10, we have a rhythm. We have the future changing. And NASA knows it. Because whatever SLS gives us, Artemis will depend on it. The Human Landing System contract is strapped directly to Starship's side. If it flies reliably, astronauts step onto the lunar soil within, American hardware under their boots, and if it doesn't, America waits. It's really as simple as that. And Mars, well, right now, Mars technically is still a bit of a fever dream. Musk is sketching domes and greenhouses by engineers count the weld seams required. But every milestone, like Flight 10, inches that fever dream toward a reality. For critics, it's exhausting. For dreamers, it's intoxicating. For the rest of us, it's proof the difference between too dumb to work and changing the game can be done in just 10 flights. So when we ask who is doing it right, it's not the ones parading those missiles or the ones, don't look at our payroll, don't look at our payroll. It's the ones that are stacking prototype win after prototype win, occasionally blowing them up, and trying again until the physics finally is submitted. And yes, Flight 10 wasn't perfect. They actually built things to fail. They're like, oh, hey, let's see if this will fail. And, oh, it didn't? Oh, okay. But it was proof that even an industry addicted to all the showmanship, there are still players obsessed with results. And that obsession may just be the reason humanity gets to stay out here in space a little longer. But Starship isn't the only game in town. If say Starship is the loud teenager of modern rocketry, and it kind of is, all stainless steel swagger and explosive growth spurts. We have another piece of space machinery that is kind of the opposite, and that is the X-37B. It's more of that quiet professional, a black and white space plane that slips into orbit without much fanfare, stays aloft for months or even years, and then glides back to Earth as if, oh, hey guys, did you miss me? It looks small, almost toy-like compared to the space shuttles of old. And there's no press conferences, no grand unveilings, just usually classified missions launched on borrowed rockets and a silence that drives conspiracy theorists wild. But every once in a while, a sliver of detail leaks through. And this time, it's something I think is genuinely fascinating because the X-37B is testing Xylon, a material that might one day help people and cargo survive Mars. Now, Xylon is not some Marvel villain because we know it would suck and fail, but it is a synthetic polymer lighter than aluminum, stronger than steel. In fact, currently it's considered the strongest man-made fiber on Earth. Woven into fabrics or composites, it resists heats, pressures, and radiation. That makes it perfect for one of the hardest problems in spaceflight, protecting fragile human bodies and delicate equipment during fiery reentries. So imagine this: a colony ship leaves Earth orbit headed for Mars. Months later, it arrives not as a monolith, but as a series of pods, each designed to hit the Martian atmosphere at incredible speed. What stands between the payload and a catastrophic burnup isn't bravado, it's material science. It's Xylon tiles and blankets, woven shields absorbing and deflecting the energy. Without that, the dream of delivering settlers or greenhouses to the red planet is just a dream. But here's why this all matters. Unlike the parade missiles or the hollow budget promises we've heard and have mocked, this Xylon testing is the quiet, unglamorous work that actually does build the future. I mean, let's face it, not really too many people are out here cheering for polymer stress tests. No one is going to pack a stadium to watch fabric samples smolder in plasma streams. But without breakthroughs like this, you don't get to go to Mars or beyond. You may not even get back to the moon again. At least not with the grand plans that we have. And it's easy to forget that the X-37B has already logged more than a decade of clandestine service, flying higher and longer than almost anything in its weight class. And if it comes back with Xylon proving its worth, that's one more piece of a puzzle solved for everyone who will ride the next generation of spacecraft. And it's kind of crazy to think that the astronauts may actually never see the polymer up close. They'll just know that when the capsule hits the atmosphere, the ship holds together. And there's something admirable in that. Progress that isn't loud, isn't flashy, but definitely essential. And yeah, Starship will hog the headlines. It's a beautiful piece of machinery. The Artemis mission may claim the spotlight. But this little small space plane testing these exotic fibers in silence might just be the quiet hero of future exploration. Because out here in space, victory isn't parades or posturing. It really is material science and engineering that just simply, quietly work. And that's the thing. Real progress in space doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it is a fabric simply riding quietly in a Black Ops space plane. But of course, it does leave out one subject humanity hasn't really tested yet. And I know I've mentioned it at least 4 times in past episodes. And yes, it gets way, way more personal than fiber. Because we've studied rockets, we've studied reactors. But what we seemingly have not studied is reproduction in space. So on that, we're going to take a short break. And here is a track inspired by the idea of reproduction in space. Proof that love, like everything, gets complicated in zero G. And welcome back aboard The Lost Wonder. I decided to go to a different musical style. Just felt right for this upcoming story. Because we've talked politics, parades, and polymers. But now it is time to tackle one of the strangest gaps in our knowledge. Yes, we've studied rockets and radiation. We've mapped out reactors and even mastered reusability of launching those rockets. But the most basic human question in space that's still mostly and largely unanswered: what happens when you try to make life beyond Earth? And we hear it all the time about colonies on the moon and cities on the Mars. But there's a quiet truth that seems to make even the weirdest biologists squirm. We still don't know if mammals can actually reproduce in space. Now, it sounds absurd. Humanity has sent probes past Pluto, the planet, land rovers on Mars, and designed nuclear power plants for lunar night, but we haven't studied the act that makes humanity possible in the first place. At least not in earnest. And the subject seems to be so awkward, so wrapped in taboos and giggles, that serious funding has lagged decades behind every other branch of space science. And that's why a recent mouse study matters perhaps more than it might actually seem. Researchers have launched frozen mouse sperm into orbit, stored it aboard the ISS, and later compared its health to control samples back on Earth. Now, yes, I don't want to know who retrieved the semen. That said, the results surprisingly encouraging. Even after floating in microgravity, bombarded by radiation, the sperm still fertilized eggs successfully once they returned. Life, it turns out, finds a way. But sperm in a vial isn't the same as, the whole process. No mammals have ever conceived, gestated, and birthed entirely off-world. We've actually have done fish, frogs, and insects. We watch fruit flies buzz through microgravity, but mice, cats, dogs, humans, still question marks. And the problem isn't just the gravity, it's radiation, fluid dynamics. Let's face it, fluid dynamics are important when you're doing certain things, and cellular development. Embryos rely on gravity to orient themselves, on Earth's shielding to keep DNA stable. Take those away, and suddenly a simple process becomes an experiment in evolutionary limits. And yeah, I know the awkward part is if we want permanent settlements beyond Earth, we can't avoid the question. We know how certain rockets work, but how about we concern ourselves with the real rockets, if you catch my meaning, Mr. Frodo? We need to know if families can even happen. Colonies aren't built on single generations. They're built on birth. And if mammalian reproduction stumbles in microgravity, the whole notion of self-sustaining off-world community collapses. And let's just not even forget about microgravity, less gravity than we're used to. Instead of the 1 unit, maybe it's a 0.8. Will things behave differently there? And this is why, in my opinion, mouse sperm experiments actually matter. They're the tiniest, most tentative step toward answering a question that underpins everything else. If life can't renew itself beyond Earth, then our species will forever just be tourists and not the settlers we dream of. I mean, yeah, look, I'm 13. The EP is older than me, okay? Despite Aggie's insistence that he's 11. There is plenty of humor in this, of course. NASA-funded sex in space is kind of a headline tabloids dream about. But beneath the Snickers, it is really something serious. Biology is destiny. And our destiny, if it lies among the stars, depending on finding out whether love and life can thrive when the ground is gone. So yeah, we're going to laugh about it when we can, because there are moments of this that are hilarious to me. But one day, some astronaut couple is going to become the Adam and Eve of a new world. And I don't mean in a religious sort of way, but you know what I mean. And they'll perhaps owe their chance in part to a batch of very brave mouse sperm. Now, another aspect of all of this, when people imagine colonies on the moon or Mars, they picture, gleaming domes and starry horizons. But the reality may look a lot more like Antarctica, cold, isolated, and deeply human in ways we don't like to admit. There, there was a recent report on harassment and misconduct at Antarctica Research Base that hits like a warning flare for space exploration. It details cases of bullying, discrimination, and sexual harassment among small crews wintering over in the ice. Now, these aren't just statistics. They're reminders that when you lock humans into an isolated, extreme environment, the challenges don't stop at frostbite and fuel shortages. They hit closer to the bone, how we treat each other when there's nowhere else to go. Now, for all of this, space planners know this. NASA and its international parties study the Antarctica precisely because it's the closest Earth has to living off-world. Months of darkness, brutal cold, thin resupply lines. It's basically a lab for isolationism. And what the lab shows isn't, well, doesn't always present the human race in a flattering way. Even highly trained, highly motivated people can crack under confinement. Power dynamics can warp, cliques will form. Safety can erode not from the environment, but ending up from each other. I'll translate that forward to a moon base or a Mars outpost. Picture a dozen astronauts far from home with no quick escape. Now add stress, fatigue, and maybe a commander with too much authority. The lessons from Antarctica suggest if we don't plan for human behavior as carefully as we plan for radiation shielding, we could find ourselves repeating the same ugly mistakes under a different sky. Now, what's really striking to me is just how predictable it all is. Psychologists have long warned that isolation magnifies small slights in major conflicts, that leadership style matters more when the crew can't leave. That diversity isn't just nice for, press release, it's a pressure valve against groupthink and abuse. And yet, Antarctica shows us we still stumble. And a bit of uncomfortable truth. Space won't make us better people. It just makes our flaws harder to escape. If harassment poisons a lab at the South Pole, you can quit, you can fly home. How do you do that on Mars when there's a window of opportunity? That's why the Antarctic reports are more than cautionary tales, they're blueprints. Every protocol that will be written for Moon and Mars crews needs to take human behavior as seriously as the oxygen supply. Clear reporting lines, independent oversight, training not just in geology and robotics, but in empathy and conflict resolution. Because the first crisis on Mars may not be a dust storm, it may be an argument that spirals into something worse. And of course, it's very tempting to imagine that the grandeur of space will lift us above these issues. But history kind of says otherwise. What keeps us alive isn't the view, it's the systems we build to protect each other when the view gets dark. So we need to take studies like Antarctica seriously, because before we can even think about mastering living on another world, we have to master living with ourselves. And we do spend so much time looking forward in space flight, the next rocket, the next base, the next decade. It's kind of easy to forget that the cosmos also keeps archives. Not in libraries, but in rocks. And sometimes those rocks carry stories that predate Earth itself. And it's kind of neat in a way that the scientists have discovered when they cracked open samples from two asteroids, Bennu and Ryugu. Inside were grains of dust older than the planet that you're currently sitting on. Not billions of years old, but billions plus change. So yes, even older than what you possibly can dream of. Fragments formed before Earth had even coalesced from a solar nebula. It's humbling stuff. You can touch your desk, your drink, your chair, and know those atoms have been recycled through stars and planets for 4.5 billion years. But the dust in Bennu and Ryuga, that's more of a prologue. It's the raw material left over from the first fires, untouched by tectonics or oceans. Holding it is like finding a fossil of time itself. Now, some of the dust did carry complex carbon compounds, the kind that make biologists go, huh? What'd you say? Now, not DNA and not life, but the Lego bricks that can snap together in chemistry worth caring about. Which means the asteroids weren't just orbiting rubble, they were a little bit of a chemical test tube, brewing recipes that might have seeded early Earth. In other words, that bagel you had for breakfast this morning, its ancestral ingredients may have been shipped in by space rocks. And we sometimes forget this when we hear sample return missions. And why should we care? They're not just practice runs for bigger grabs like I talked about on last week's ITC. They're core samples of cosmic history. Osiris-Rex plucked Bennu's dust with a robotic handoff that looked almost casual. And Japan kissed Ryugo so gracefully it felt like choreography. Now, the payoff is sitting in labs now, dust older than continents, older than oceans, and even older than Andrew. And trust me, that's saying something. Yes, I know, Andrew, I heard you groan. You're not older than this. This one wins. Now, humor aside, these findings connect us to something profound, that the Earth is not a sealed bubble. It's part of a vast conveyor belt of chemistry. When rained down in dust and pebbles, when we think about it, they may have been the catalyst for everything from microbes to Mozart. And the fact that we can, scoop some of it up, bottle it, and bring it home, that's humanity's writing footnotes in a book the universe started long before we were even a thought. So the next time you hear about an asteroid mission, don't just think rock. Think time capsule. Think of a courier service delivering ingredients for life long before life knew what they could do with them. And think of the scientists bent over microscopes, brushing eternity off their lab coats as they whisper, "This is older than Earth and Andrew." So in the summer of 1977, we traveled back to a man named Jerry Amon, who was combing through radio data at Ohio State's Big Ear Telescope when he saw something odd. A narrowband spike, a burst of radio energy lasting just 72 seconds. Wait for that energy burst to brag about itself. It was so clean, so out of place, that he circled it in red pen and scribbled one word in the margin. Wow. For nearly 50 years, the WOW signal has been SETI's crown jewel, the one that got away. Was it aliens? Was it Earth's own radio noise bouncing around the atmosphere? Truth is, nobody knew. The signal never repeated. We never caught it again. And in science, one-off events are, they're intoxicating, but quite maddening. They're the cosmic equivalent of a ghost story, compelling, but largely unprovable. But there is some new analysis that is suggesting a far less exotic explanations. It seems astronomers have traced the signal's direction back toward a star system nearly 1,800 light years away, home to a sun-like star and at least one large exoplanet. I know you're getting aroused here a little bit, but it's not extraterrestrials with antennas. Just the unfortunately natural radio signature of a star doing star system things. A cosmic static burst dressed up as a mystery. And while yes, for some that's disappointing that no flying saucers, no interstellar Morse code, just another piece of background noise identified, the wow becomes that. But here's I think an important part of this whole thing, because even if it wasn't aliens, the wow signal changed how we think about searching. It proved that extraordinary spikes can appear, that telescopes need to be vigilant, and that the sky isn't just a quiet dome of nothingness. It gave a generation of SETI researchers a myth to chase. And myths often lead to dreams, and dreams can become a reality and become just as valuable as data. They keep the lights on, the antennas pointed up, the graduation students inspired. The new solution doesn't slam the book shut. Pinpointing the signal's likely origin doesn't mean we know everything about it. Stars and planets do emit radio noise, yes. But what kind, how stable, how structured? It's those questions that remained, and let's be honest, until we ruled out everything, that red pen still might have circled history. And there's also something incredible about the name sticking. Wow isn't scientific, but it's human. It captures that blend of wonder and confusion we feel when the universe taps us on the shoulder and whispers, "Did you hear that?" Even if the whisper turns out to be mundane, the shiver it sends is real. So maybe the wow signal wasn't first contact. Maybe it was just the cosmos clearing its throat. But in the story of human curiosity, it earns a place. Because every time we tune a telescope to the sky, we're hoping, just maybe, for another margin note, another red circle. A moment that jolts us from boredom to awe. And if one day we do catch the real thing, an unambiguous, structured signal, repeated and undeniable, you can bet someone will still grab a pen, circle the numbers, and scrawl a word in that margin. It may not be wow next time, but it will sure as hell feel the same. Now, our next story, we borrow a headline from a few decades ago. The juice is loose. And no, not that one. This one doesn't carry, a football or court cases, and definitely doesn't ride around in white Broncos. This is more about ESA's Jupiter Icy Moon Explorer, better known by its acronym JUICE. And right now it's stealing a little gravity from Venus on its long road to Jupiter. Now, gravity assists are the cosmic equivalent of hitchhiking. You swing close to a planet, trade a little energy, and slingshot yourself onward without burning any extra fuel. It's orbital mechanics as a beautiful, beautiful show. And when it works, it really does look like magic. For JUICE, this flyby of Venus is just one step in a years-long ballet that will eventually drop the probe into the Jovian system in hopefully the 2030s. Why are we going through all this trouble? Because Jupiter's moons, Ganymede, Callisto, Europa, may actually hold the best chance for life in the solar system. Beneath their icy crust lies oceans, vast and hidden, warmed not by sunlights, but by tidal flexing. Entire alien seas locked under miles of frozen surface. JUICE was built to sniff them out. Radar to probe the ice, spectrometers to analyze composition, magnometers to read the whispers of buried salt water. But before it can sip Europa's secrets, JUICE needs a little more speed than a white Bronco can provide, and needs lots and lots of it. And Venus, in all her cloudy glory, just gave it a boost. Now, of course, it wasn't glamorous. There's no, unfortunately, no selfie stick extended from the spacecraft, no dramatic plume of dust, no 72 cop cars chasing it, just instruments ticking, trajectories shifting, and a probe silently threading the needle of celestial mechanics. These flybys are reminders that space travel isn't brute force, it's patience. You don't barrel straight to Jupiter. You weave a path of planetary encounters, each one bending your course, shaving propellant, and setting up for the grand finale. And it's JUICE represents a different velocity from the rockets we've been talking about tonight. We don't have the explosive cadence of SpaceX. There's no parades about it. There's no sputtering ancient legacies. This is more Europe, steady, deliberate, scientific, and well, it takes a while to learn things. Less fireworks, but more notebooks. But don't mistake that for dullness in this case. By the time it arrives at Jupiter, it will be our first dedicated mission to orbit Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system, bigger even than Mercury. Why is Mercury still a planet if Ganymede is just a moon? But just think about it. Imagine the images we'll get, the data, the possibility of an ocean world humming beneath ice. Every kilometer of the Venus flyby was a service toward that. And if for one thing we've learned about astronomers over, 5 years, 6 years of this show, astronomers love metaphors. They call galaxies whirlpools, nebula nurseries, and black holes Lizzos. Hungry. But sometimes the universe hands them an image so striking it doesn't need poetry, it just needs honesty. And that's what has happened with a young star called HD 169142, where scientists just found an exoplanet orbiting inside not one, but but a whole stack of rings. If you will, picture Saturn for a moment. Stretch it across the solar system, and then add a planet carving pathways through those dusty bands. The results look less like a solar system, more like a vinyl record still being pressed. Grooves etched by gravity into cosmic dust. And yes, I know what you're thinking. So I'm going to say it too. Yes, this system has more rings than J-Lo. Now, what makes this discovery so remarkable isn't just the beauty of the image, but the fact that astronomers caught a planet in the act of sculpting its own neighborhood. Now, it's been theorized about for decades, young planets carving gaps in protoplanetary disk like lawnmowers clearing paths. But actually seeing it directly with telescopes sharp enough to reveal the ripples, that's something entirely different. It's not just a snapshot of a solar system, it's a time machine. This is what our own backyard might have looked like 4.5 billion years ago, when Jupiter was busy bulldozing every mom and every piece of material, carving gaps, shaping the structure of everything that came to matter. To look at HD 169142 is to watch creation happening in real time. And buried in the dust, there may be more than just one world. Some of those rings could be shepherded by unseen planets, smaller than our current telescopes can catch. Every groove hints at mass, every ripple at gravity's invisible hand. It's like seeing fingerprints left on clay before the sculpture is finished. Now, for exoplanet hunters, this is quite thrilling. We've cataloged thousands of worlds, most through indirect tricks, watching starlight dim, listening for gravitational wobbles. But this is a rare moment where we get to see both the world and the workshop. The planet and the raw material still swirling around it. And it matters because discs like this aren't just eye candy. They're laboratories of habitability. The chemistry in those rings will decide whether rocky worlds form, whether water molecules bind, and whether someday another species might ask their own version of, are we alone? So when you see the images of HD 169142 rings, don't just laugh at the J-Lo comparison. Let's be honest, it's kind of deserved. But look closer, and you're staring at the earliest chapter of planetary evolution. A chapter that probably once played out here and is still being written light years away. And every so often, as we look out, sometimes we get to use telescopes with less power to see things, because the solar system occasionally likes to throw us a visitor. A rock or an iceberg that doesn't belong here, plunging in from the darkness between the stars, cutting across our sky like an uninvited guest. Astronomers are calling them interstellar comets. And we've only ever really confirmed 3 so far. Now, the newest carries a name equal parts poetic and bureaucratic, 31 Atlas. And already many telescopes have swung towards it like guys watching the latest Sydney Sweeney commercial. But the James Webb Space Telescope decided to take a peek as well and saw something unexpected. A coma rich in carbon dioxide, shimmering in infrared like a ghostly halo. Instruments closer to home are gearing up for more. Europe's Mars orbiters will watch as the comet swings past the red planet in just a few weeks, giving us kind of a front row seat. And of course, the headlines have already written themselves. We've mentioned one of them before. Interstellar visitor streaks into our solar system. Cue the memes, cue the tabloids. Cut to the guy, with the hair shouting up toward the heavens. It's aliens. Except it isn't. Not this time. At least, yeah. Atlas is ice and dust. A leftover shard from another star system's construction yard. What makes it remarkable isn't that it carries a message, but that it carries chemistry. The ices locked inside its nucleus are samples from another neighborhood, molecules forged around another sun, probably billions of years ago. When those ices boil off, we get to read the recipe. And that recipe tells us how planetary systems cook, or at least the one that this came from. Every interstellar comet is a lab experiment hurled across the galaxy. Most of them never leave their birth systems. A rare few get kicked out by giant planets, flung into the dark and wander for millions, if not billions a year, until by sheer chance they gaze hours. Really, to catch one is to catch lightning in a bottle, except the bottle is older than Earth, and the lightning has been traveling since before humanity was a whisper. And that's why mission planners are salivating. Concepts are already being floated, small probes that could chase an interstellar object, sample its gases, and even ride alongside. Once in a lifetime isn't necessarily, a misnomer here. 31 Atlas will pass, fade, and vanish into the interstellar night. Miss it, and you may have to wait centuries for the next one. And the most disturbing part is every one of the visitors has surprised us. The first Omamau looked like a cigar tumbling like a lost spear that had Abbey Loeb with a bigger erection than Viagra could ever give him. The second, Borisov, was more conventional, but still carried alien chemistry. And Atlas is shaping up to be different again, with its own quirks, its own fingerprints. They're not ships, they're not signals, but they are, if you want to look at them honestly, gifts. Messages written not in binary, but in molecules. And if we're wise enough to catch them, we get to read the story of worlds we may never, ever see. And with that, let's step outside tonight and look up. The moon is fat and it's glowing because we just passed the corn moon, the September full moon of harvest. The Mohawk call it Seski Hukuwana Nino Hanatasha. Yeah. EP really hates me, but it means time of much freshness. Now, admittedly, if I was drinking and saying it 3 times fast, I'd probably have said it a little closer to the actual name. But let's not get too cozy with Luna, because the moon is on the move, as always. Over the next 2 weeks, it will slim down to a third quarter crescent by September 14th, perfect for early risers to catch it low in the dawn sky. That shrinking moon will finally darken into a new moon on September 21st, turning off the cosmic spotlight and letting the stars strut their stuff. And strut they will. Because around the time the moon takes its bow, Saturn hits opposition on the 21st, which means Earth is parked directly between the sun and the ringed giant. Translation: Saturn is up all night, shining brighter than anything other time this year. Other than, of course, the moon. Even a modest backyard telescope will show you the rings, tilted like a cosmic halo. Meanwhile, Jupiter is climbing higher every night, rising around midnight, but creeping earlier towards evening skies. By mid-month, it's hard to miss in the east. Big, bright, daring. Just daring. You, yes, you, to count its Galilean moons. And yes, Comet 31 Atlas, the largest interstellar visitor, you won't see it with a naked eye, but telescopes from Earth in orbit are watching it very closely. Around September 10th, Atlas will swing past Mars, close enough that the Earth Mars orbiter will get a ringside seat. So, yes, we will get to see it at least in a different perspective. So, we'll have a chunk of ice and dust from another star system buzzing our solar neighborhood, and we'll be watching it live. You know, I'm going to say it somewhere. Carl Sagan is grinning. So, what do we have for the forecast? We got Saturn's blaze at its brightest all night on the 21st. You can catch Jupiter climbing earlier each evening. You can say goodbye to Venus before sunrise. And if you're lucky enough to have a telescope, maybe raise a glass to Comet Atlas as it swings by Mars. Because the sky, for all its precision, if you haven't picked up on the theme of the night, it's all theater. The moon plays spotlight. The planets dance on cue, and once in a while, an interstellar drunk wanderer struts across the stage. And you probably don't want to miss that show. So that's it for tonight's show. Thank you for tuning in whenever and however you do. Special thanks to NASA, SpaceX, Space.com, Ars Technica, NASA Spaceflight, Popular Mechanics, and more for the stories and inspiration tonight. With me at the helm, the EP setting course, and the ship's computer in the back whispering star maps through the static, this is the Lost Wanderer podcast. Until next orbit, I hope you enjoyed the show, learned a little something, and maybe even had a laugh or two along the way.
The universe is a pretty big place. It's bigger than anything anyone has ever dreamed of before. So if it's just us, it seems like an awful waste of space. Right?
When I was young,